You ever witness karma hit someone so fast it felt scripted? I was at Buckingham Palace, soaking in the tradition, when this arrogant tourist did the unthinkable. He spat in the face of one of the Queen's guards. Everyone froze. But what happened next? Let's just say it was the kind of instant justice you dream of seeing in real life, and it unfolded in the most unexpected way. I'd always dreamed of going to London. There is something magical about the idea of walking through streets layered with centuries of history, where every cobblestone seemed to have a story to tell. So when I finally booked my ticket and stepped off the plane, it felt surreal. The first few days were exactly what I imagined. Afternoon teas, double-decker buses, even a spontaneous downpour that soaked me to the bone, but somehow made me smile. But nothing could have prepared me for what happened on my fourth day, the day I decided to visit Buckingham Palace. It was one of those perfectly overcast London mornings where the air was crisp but not biting, and the soft gray sky made everything look straight out of a postcard. As I walked up the mall, the iconic red road leading to the palace, I could already hear the buzz of tourists gathering near the gates. Cameras clicked, voices in dozens of languages floated around me, and there was this collective excitement. People from all corners of the world, all here to catch a glimpse of British royalty, or at least the legendary royal guards in their unmistakable red coats and bearskin hats. I made my way through the crowd, finding a good spot near the gates where I could see the guards standing stone-faced, rifles resting on their shoulders. There was something almost hypnotic about watching them. Their discipline, their absolute commitment to staying still no matter what happened around them. It was awe-inspiring. I couldn't help but wonder what kind of mental fortitude it took to stand there for hours while hundreds of strangers pointed cameras at your face. As I admired the scene, my attention was pulled away by a loud, nasal voice cutting through the peaceful ambience. Oh my God, is this what everyone's obsessed about? They don't even move. I turned my head and saw him, a guy in his mid-20s, wearing a flashy designer tracksuit, complete with a thick gold chain around his neck. His sunglasses were perched on his head, despite the lack of sun, and he had this smug, punchable grin on his face. He stood out like a sore thumb among the respectful crowd. Next to him was what I assumed was his girlfriend, who seemed half amused, half embarrassed by his antics. He strutted forward, pushing past people like he owned the place, ignoring the polite protests of tourists he bumped into. "Come on, babe. Let's hit a pic with these guys," he said, dragging his girlfriend toward the nearest guard. She hesitated, clearly uncomfortable, but he wasn't having it. "It's just for fun. They're like props, anyway." I felt my stomach twist at his words. The royal guards weren't props. They were serving soldiers, part of a centuries-old tradition. But the guy didn't care. He pulled out his phone, switched it to selfie mode, and started making ridiculous faces next to the guard, sticking his tongue out and even pretending to lick the guard's bearskin hat. People in the crowd began murmuring, some shaking their heads in disapproval, others pulling out their phones, not wanting to miss what was quickly becoming a spectacle. A few even called out, "Hey, show some respect," but the guy just laughed it off. "Relax. It's not like he can do anything," he sneered, waving his hand dismissively at the stoic guard. I felt torn. Part of me wanted to say something, but another part worried about escalating the situation. London wasn't my home turf, and I wasn't sure how things worked in these scenarios. But as the guy's behavior grew worse, the tension in the crowd became palpable. He started circling the guard, clapping his hands loudly near the guard's face, trying to get a reaction. The guard, to his credit, didn't flinch. His eyes remained focused ahead, face blank, the epitome of discipline. But the tourist wasn't done. "Bet you're hating this, huh?" Just standing there like a robot, he mocked, stepping dangerously close. Then, in a move that made my heart drop, he reached out and flicked the guard's uniform jacket, muttering, "What's this made of?" "Polyester." A collective gasp rippled through the crowd. A few people shouted at him to stop, but the guy just grinned wider, clearly thriving off the attention. It was like he thought he was the star of some hidden camera prank show. At that point, I started recording on my phone. I didn't know why. Maybe to have proof if things got worse, or maybe because some part of me knew this was leading to something big. The guy turned back to his girlfriend, who was now standing off to the side, arms crossed, clearly uncomfortable. "Babe, take a video. This is going to be hilarious," he said before doing something I will never forget. He turned back to the guard, stood right in front of him, and with the most smug expression, hocked up a wad of spit and launched it straight at the guard's face. The spit hit dead center on the guard's cheek, slowly dripping down. For a moment, time felt like it stopped. The crowd went completely silent, the air thick with shock and disbelief. My hands were shaking as I continued filming, my heart racing. The guard didn't move. He didn't flinch. He just stood there, face stoic, the spit trailing down his cheek as if it didn't exist. That kind of discipline was unreal. It made the tourist look even smaller, even more pathetic in comparison. But the mood of the crowd had shifted entirely. Where before there were murmurs and mild disapproval, now there was pure outrage. Someone yelled, "That's assault." Another voice, angrier, shouted, "You absolute wanker." The tourist, for the first time, looked uneasy. He scanned the crowd, noticing the dozens of phones pointed at him, capturing his vile act. But before he could slink away or make an excuse, a deep, authoritative voice cut through the noise. "Sir, step away from the guard immediately." The tourist froze. Everyone turned toward the source of the voice, and that's when things really took a turn. The silence after the spit landed was suffocating. It was like the air had been sucked out of the entire crowd, everyone frozen in disbelief. I don't know what I expected to happen, but watching that thick line of spit trail down the guard's face without even the smallest twitch from him, man, it hit different. You could tell everyone around me felt it too. Phones were still up, cameras still rolling, but no one said anything for what felt like an eternity. Even the pigeons seemed to pause mid-step. And then, slowly, the mood shifted. It was as if the sheer weight of what just happened settled on all of us at the same time. I heard someone behind me mutter, "What the hell is wrong with him?" While another person whispered, "That's assault, right? That's got to be assault." The tourist, the one who spat, seemed to realize he might have pushed things too far, but instead of apologizing or backing off, he doubled down. "Oh, come on. He's fine. He's a bloody statue," he scoffed, though there was an unmistakable crack in his voice now, like he wasn't as sure of himself anymore. His girlfriend stood a few feet away, her face pale with embarrassment. She wasn't filming anymore. In fact, she was quietly edging away from him, as if she didn't want to be associated with what had just gone down. That's when the murmurs in the crowd grew louder. People were openly calling him out now. One older man in a tweed cap yelled, "You absolute disgrace. Go back to where you came from." Another woman nearby shook her head and muttered, "What kind of person spits on a soldier?" The tourist looked around, realizing the crowd wasn't on his side. His earlier bravado was fading, but he tried to save face, laughing awkwardly. "Geez, lighten up. It's just a joke. No harm done, right?" He gestured toward the guard, who still hadn't moved, spit now drying on his cheek. But no one was laughing. People started booing him, and I even saw a guy in front pretending to cough the word "loser" under his breath, loud enough for the tourist to hear. The tension was building, like a kettle about to boil over. And then, the sound that cut through everything, a commanding voice, firm and clear. "Sir, step away from the guard. Now." Everyone turned at once. Standing just beyond the crowd was a man in a dark suit, earpiece visible, radiating authority. It didn't take a genius to figure out he was some kind of undercover security, probably royal protection or something similar. The tourist's face drained of color. He stammered, I wasn't doing anything. It was just a prank." The security officer didn't flinch. "You spat on a member of the Queen's Guard. That's assault." He stepped forward, flashing some kind of ID, and within moments, 2 uniformed officers appeared from the side of the palace gates, moving with alarming speed. I couldn't believe how fast things escalated. One moment, it was a stupid prank gone too far, and the next, the tourist was being flanked by officers who grabbed him firmly but without unnecessary force. "Wait, I didn't mean it. It was just a joke," the tourist protested, his voice cracking now. Gone was the smugness, replaced by pure panic. The crowd was eating it up. Someone even started clapping, slow and sarcastic, and soon others joined in. A chorus of applause echoed around the palace gates as the officers cuffed the guy, leading him away. His girlfriend followed behind, half-heartedly muttering, "He didn't mean it, you know," but it was clear even she wasn't buying her own words. I kept filming, my hands still shaky. There was something oddly satisfying about watching the consequences hit him so hard and fast. It was like karma had been waiting in the wings, ready to take center stage. As they led him past the crowd, someone called out, "Smile for the camera, mate. You're going viral," and the guy visibly winced. But what struck me the most was the guard. Through all of it, the spit, the heckling, the arrest, he hadn't moved an inch. Not a flinch, not a blink. Absolute steel. It was incredible, really. I felt this deep respect for him, like witnessing the embodiment of discipline and dignity right in front of me. Eventually, the officers led the tourist out of sight, and the crowd began to disperse, buzzing with energy. People swapped stories, showed each other their videos, and speculated about what kind of trouble the tourist was about to face. I stood there for a moment longer, watching the guards. The one who'd been spat on still hadn't moved, but I noticed one subtle shift, a blink, slow and deliberate. It was as if he knew the moment had passed, but he wasn't going to give anyone the satisfaction of reacting. I turned off my phone and sighed, still trying to process what I'd just seen. I had come to Buckingham Palace expecting a quiet, touristy experience. Instead, I'd witnessed something that would stick with me for the rest of my life. And somehow, I had the sinking feeling this story was far from over. Even after the tourist was dragged away, handcuffed and humiliated, the scene around Buckingham Palace still buzzed with an almost electric tension. People were huddled in small groups, rewatching the videos they'd captured, swapping details like eyewitnesses to a historic event. But my eyes stayed locked on the guard. The one who had just been spat on, taunted, flicked, and humiliated in front of hundreds of people. And yet he stood there perfectly still as though none of it had happened. I don't think I'd ever felt such a weird combination of emotions before. Admiration, respect, and this deep, gnawing sense of shame for even being part of the crowd that had just stood there, watching it all go down. I mean, we booed the guy, called him out, but none of us had stepped in before it escalated. And yet, this guard, this absolute fortress of a man, had taken it all without a single flinch. The spit was still there, dried now, a grim little badge of his commitment to the job. His face remained stoic, eyes staring forward, unblinking. It was almost inhuman. I mean, how do you do that? How do you stand there while some stranger disrespects you to your face, literally spits on you, and you don't even move? A woman next to me whispered to her husband, "Do you think they're allowed to wipe it off? Or do they have to wait until their shift's over?" Her voice was hushed, like we were in church or something. The man just shook his head, clearly as in awe as I was. And that's when I realized something. This wasn't just about following orders or sticking to tradition. This was something deeper. This was about discipline, about respect for the uniform, for history, for the role he was playing. It was about embodying something bigger than himself. A few people started murmuring that maybe someone should tell him he could wipe it off, but almost as if on cue, another guard, stationed a few meters away, called out in a booming voice, "Make way for the officer." The crowd parted like the Red Sea as a higher-ranking officer approached. He was dressed differently, more ornate, with a sash across his chest and medals glinting under the gray London sky. His boots clacked loudly against the pavement as he marched directly toward the guard. Everyone held their breath. The officer stopped right in front of the spit-covered guard, looked him over, then nodded sharply. "You've done your duty well," he said in a voice loud enough for everyone to hear. "Stand down for relief." It was only then, after what felt like an eternity, that the guard finally moved. Slowly, methodically, he shifted his rifle from one shoulder to the other and stepped back. The precision of it all was mind-blowing. It wasn't dramatic or flashy, but somehow it was more powerful than any confrontation or retaliation could have been. The crowd started to clap, slowly at first, then louder. Not the sarcastic kind we gave the tourist earlier, but real applause. Honest, from-the-gut appreciation. I felt my hands moving before my brain caught up, joining in. But even as the guard walked away, disappearing into a small side gate where the other off-duty guards entered, he didn't acknowledge the applause. No wave, no nod, nothing. Just pure, unwavering professionalism. It hit me then. The guy who spat on him had wanted a reaction. That was the whole point. He wanted the guard to break character, to yell, to push back, to do something. But by not reacting, by sticking to his duty, the guard had won. He'd risen so far above the petty cruelty of it all that it almost felt poetic. And yet, I couldn't help but wonder what was going through his mind. Was he seething beneath that stone-cold expression? Was he disgusted? Angry? Or had he just trained himself to block it all out? I never know, but damn, did I respect the hell out of him. I overheard someone behind me say, they're trained not to move no matter what. Some of these guys get harassed daily. Another person chimed in, "Yeah, but that was next level. Can't believe he didn't even blink." I pulled out my phone, rewatching the video I'd recorded. The moment the spit hit his cheek, the camera captured it perfectly. But what stood out even more was the sheer stillness, the kind that radiated strength, not weakness. As I stood there, still processing it all, I noticed a few more guards moving into position, replacing the shift. The whole machine kept going, like clockwork, as if the incident hadn't just unraveled in front of the palace gates. But even with the tourists gone and the guard relieved, the crowd lingered, buzzing with energy, sharing videos and stories. knowing they'd all witnessed something extraordinary. There was a kind of reverence now, a collective understanding of the sheer willpower it took to do what that guard had done. And somewhere deep down, I knew this wasn't over. That tourist? He wasn't just walking away with a slap on the wrist. Karma, I was certain, was waiting right around the corner, sharpening its knives. The crowd eventually started to thin out, but the buzz from what had just happened lingered like static in the air. People drifted away from Buckingham Palace, heads bent over their phones, watching the footage they'd captured, already uploading it to social media. But I stuck around a little longer, not sure why. Maybe I just wanted to see how it all played out. As I stood there, still mulling over the surreal scene I'd witnessed, I caught sight of the tourist again. He was sitting on a stone bench just outside the gates, hands now free of the cuffs, but rubbing at his wrists like the phantom sensation of them was still there. His girlfriend sat a few feet away, arms crossed tightly over her chest, her face a mixture of embarrassment and fury. You could practically feel the tension between them. "Are you happy now?" she hissed, not even bothering to lower her voice. A few passers-by glanced their way, but quickly looked away, sensing the unfolding drama. The guy muttered something under his breath, too low for me to catch, but it didn't seem to matter. She was on a roll. "You ruined our trip. You know that, right? You think spitting on a guard was funny? What the hell is wrong with you?" He tried to defend himself, but his words came out weak, like even he didn't believe them. "It was just a prank. I didn't think they'd actually call the cops." She stood up, grabbing her purse. "You're a joke," she snapped before storming off, disappearing into the flow of tourists. I could see it on his face, the moment the full weight of it all hit him. He was alone now. The humiliation wasn't just from the crowd or the arrest. It was in knowing he'd screwed up so badly that even the one person who came with him had had enough. I almost felt a tiny twinge of sympathy, almost. But then, things took a turn. A man in a sleek gray suit, who I hadn't noticed before, approached the tourist. He wasn't wearing any obvious uniform, but there was something about him, an air of authority, confidence. He had an earpiece, the kind you see on security agents in movies, and a subtle badge clipped to his belt. "Mr. Reynolds?" the man asked, his voice cool but firm. The tourist looked up, his face still red and splotchy. "Yeah." The man flipped open a small black wallet, flashing an official-looking ID. "I'm with the Royal Household Security Division. We need to have a word." I felt my heart rate kick up a notch. "What now?" The tourist groaned, slumping against the bench. "Look, I already got arrested. I thought this was over." The agent didn't flinch. "Not quite. You assaulted a member of the Queen's Guard on royal grounds. There are specific protocols for that." The tourist's face twisted in disbelief. "It was just spit. I didn't hit him or anything." The agent's face remained stone cold. "Spitting on someone is classified as assault under UK law. But more importantly, you disrespected a soldier performing his duty. And there are consequences for that, some you might not expect." I wasn't sure what he meant, but the tourist clearly wasn't processing it. He was too wrapped up in his own self-pity. The agent continued, "You're being banned from entering any royal properties indefinitely. That includes all the palace's castles, gardens, everything. And since you're a tourist, your visa privileges are being reviewed. You could be deported before your trip even finishes." That got through to him. His mouth dropped open. "You can't be serious." The agent raised an eyebrow. "Oh, I'm dead serious. Actions have consequences, Mr. Reynolds. And when you disrespect the traditions and people that represent this country, you pay for it." The tourist buried his face in his hands, groaning loudly. I could feel the crowd nearby, catching snippets of the conversation. Phones subtly raised again, capturing every second. But the agent wasn't done. "And one more thing, your little stunt? It's already going viral. Multiple angles. Thousands of views. Give it a few hours, and your face will be plastered everywhere." I glanced down at my own phone, where the video I'd filmed was already racking up views. Hundreds of comments, all roasting the tourist for what he'd done. I scrolled through them. "Karma hits fast, absolute trash human. Glad he got what he deserved." The tourist looked up at the agent, desperation in his eyes. "Isn't there anything I can do? I'll apologize. I'll say it was a mistake." But the agent just shook his head. "It's too late for that. The guard you spat on? He showed more restraint and dignity in that moment than you probably ever have in your life. That's not something an apology can fix." With that, the agent turned and walked away, leaving the tourist to sit there, drowning in the fallout of his own actions. And you know what? It felt satisfying, like watching a movie where the villain finally gets what's coming to him. It wasn't just the public shaming or the legal trouble. It It was the fact that he'd been forced to face the consequences head-on. No escape, no easy way out. As I walked away, I couldn't help but think about that guard again. The one who never moved, never reacted, and yet somehow came out of all this as the bigger man. It was weird, but in some strange way, his silence spoke louder than anything else that day. And the tourist? Well, he'd be leaving London a lot sooner than he'd planned, carrying with him a story he'd probably wish he could forget. But the internet? The internet wouldn't let him. I thought the saga was over after the tourist's public dressing down by the royal security agent, but karma, it seemed, wasn't quite done with him yet. The tourist, Reynolds, I think the agent called him, sat there on the bench, slumped over, his hands running through his hair like he was trying to claw his way out of the mess he'd made. His girlfriend had long since vanished, probably blocking his number as she walked. I drifted toward the gates, watching as the Queen's Guard completed another seamless changing of the guard, like none of the earlier chaos had happened. It struck me again how deep their discipline ran, how the institution was bigger than any one moment of disrespect. But as I turned to leave, I caught sight of something. Two of the palace guards had re-emerged, flanking the original guard, the one who had been spat on. But this time, something was different. The guard who had endured the spit had finally been allowed to step down and was walking alongside a higher-ranking officer. But he wasn't headed inside. No, they were making their way toward Reynolds, who was still wallowing in his own misery on that stone bench. The crowd that hadn't fully dispersed noticed too, their phones rising again like an unspoken reflex. I found myself stepping closer, curiosity pulling me in. The officer stopped a few feet from Reynolds, the guard standing silently by his side, rifle still at his shoulder. The officer cleared his throat, loud enough for Reynolds to hear. The tourist looked up, his face pale and blotchy, eyes bloodshot from what I could only guess were tears he refused to let fall. "Mr. Reynolds," the officer began, his voice sharp but not cruel. "I believe you owe someone an apology." Reynolds' eyes flicked to the guard. For the first time since the entire fiasco began, you could see real shame settling into him. He stood, shuffling awkwardly toward the guard, his mouth opening and closing like he couldn't find the right words. "I am sorry," he stammered out, barely above a whisper. I wasn't thinking." The guard, of course, said nothing. He just stood there, that same stoic expression on his face. It was like talking to a statue. The officer, however, wasn't satisfied. "Louder, so that everyone can hear." Reynolds clenched his fists at his sides, his whole body practically vibrating with humiliation. "I'm sorry," he barked louder this time. "I was an idiot. I disrespected you. I shouldn't have done that." A few scattered claps echoed from the crowd, but they felt more sarcastic than supportive. The officer nodded. "Good, but actions speak louder than words." And that's when things took a turn no one expected. The officer reached into his pocket and pulled out a small, folded sheet of paper. As part of our educational outreach program, we sometimes offer offenders like yourself a chance to gain a deeper understanding of the traditions you've so callously mocked. Reynolds blinked. What? The officer handed him the paper. "You are being offered the opportunity to participate in a day of service at the royal household. You will shadow members of the palace staff and gain first-hand experience of the discipline, respect, and history that you so clearly lack." The crowd murmured, surprised. Reynolds started to protest, but the officer cut him off. "Or," the officer added, "you can face the full legal consequences of your actions: public assault, violation of royal grounds, potential deportation. Your choice." It was a brilliant move. No easy escape, no slinking away into anonymity. He'd either face the law or publicly atone. Reynolds swallowed hard. I'll do the service." The officer nodded approvingly. "Good choice. But the best part? The service wasn't going to be some behind-the-scenes, low-key punishment. No, they made sure the entire process would be visible. A week later, a follow-up video made the rounds online. There was Reynolds, decked out in a drab gray uniform. Not military, but still stiff and formal, cleaning the very grounds where he'd disrespected the guard. He was sweeping pathways, scrubbing statues, and even polishing the iconic black boots of the Queen's Guards under the watchful eyes of palace staff. And they didn't make it easy. Every mistake was pointed out. Every corner he missed was highlighted. It wasn't cruel, but it was thorough. And the best part? It was all filmed and uploaded, not by random passersby this time, but by the palace's own PR team, highlighting the educational opportunity for tourists who crossed the line. The internet ate it up. Memes flooded social media. Pictures of Reynolds scrubbing floors with captions like, "When karma doesn't just hit, it mops." Others showed him polishing boots with the tag, spit happens. Now clean it up. But more than the memes, there was something deeply satisfying about seeing him forced to respect the very institution he mocked. He wasn't just punished, he was humbled, and publicly at that. Interviews later surfaced of Reynolds talking about the experience. In one, he admitted, "I thought it was all just for show, the guards, the traditions, but being there, seeing how much discipline and respect goes into it, I get it now. I was a complete idiot." And maybe he meant it. Maybe he didn't. But it didn't really matter. The lesson was delivered, loud, clear, and in front of millions of eyes. The guard? He never once commented on the ordeal. Never spoke out. Never broke character. Never even acknowledged the chaos that had swirled around him. And in that silence, in that unflinching commitment, he won. The tourist? Well, he became an example. A living, breathing cautionary tale for every other entitled visitor who thought they could treat centuries of tradition like a joke. And honestly, it was the most satisfying ending we could have hoped for. You'd think the story would have ended there, with the tourist, Reynolds, humbled, and the guard standing tall, never once breaking protocol. But no, the internet wasn't about to let this one fade quietly into the background. The fallout from the whole incident was bigger than anyone could have predicted. The original video, where Reynolds spat in the guard's face and immediately got arrested, blew up fast. Within hours, it had millions of views. People from all over the world were commenting, sharing, and dissecting every moment. It didn't matter what platform you were on, TikTok, Twitter, Instagram, YouTube. This was the video of the week. What really took it to the next level, though, was the follow-up content. The Palace's PR team had leaned into it, turning what could have been a PR nightmare into an absolute masterclass in reputation management. Clips of Reynolds scrubbing the palace grounds, polishing boots, and hauling heavy equipment became viral gold. And the internet? It had a field day. There were endless reaction videos, some creators just laughing at his misery, others breaking down the cultural significance of the Queen's Guard and how Reynolds had disrespected something deeply rooted in British tradition. There were even compilation videos of instant karma moments. And guess who was the thumbnail on almost all of them? Reynolds, mid-spit, with the guard stoically standing in place. But the real kicker? Memes. So many memes. One of the most popular ones showed a split screen. On the left, Reynolds smirking as he leaned toward the guard, and on the right, him scrubbing the palace steps with a caption that read, "From tourist to tour guide. Life comes at you fast." Another had him polishing boots, with the words, "Spit on the guard? Hope you like the taste of humility." And while the internet was tearing Reynolds apart, the guard became something of a silent hero. People started calling him the Stonewall for his unbreakable composure. Fan pages popped up, sharing clips of him standing tall during the incident, with comments praising his discipline and strength. There was something poetic about it. The man who never uttered a word became the loudest voice in the story. But it didn't stop at internet fame. The palace, seeing the positive public reaction, started an educational initiative aimed at tourists. They called it Respect the Guard, using the incident as a cautionary tale about cultural respect and proper conduct. They even used footage of Reynolds' day of service as part of a short film shown in tourist centers around London. It was framed as a learning opportunity. Don't be that guy. And the kicker? Reynolds had signed a media release during his day of service, likely thinking it was just standard paperwork. He probably hadn't realized that meant the palace could use the footage however they pleased. His face became a symbol, not just of disrespect, but of what happens when you think you're above the rules. As for Reynolds himself, his life took a pretty rough hit. His social media accounts went dark after the videos blew up. But that didn't stop internet detectives from finding out more about him. Turns out, he'd been an aspiring influencer trying to grow a travel vlog. Well, that dream died overnight. Brands distanced themselves immediately, even ones he wasn't officially partnered with, posting things like, "We do not condone disrespectful behavior and have no affiliation with Mr. Reynolds." He became a meme, a joke, and an example all at once. But the part that stuck with me the most? The lasting impact on the people who watched it all unfold. I'd read comments from tourists saying they'd always wanted to take silly photos with the Queen's Guard but now realized how important it was to respect the role. Schools used the incident as a lesson on cultural sensitivity. Even late-night hosts joked about it, but with an undertone of "don't be this guy." The guard, of course, never broke his silence. No interviews, no statements, just that stoic, unshakable presence. But the internet did something wild. They started a fundraiser in his honor, raising thousands for military charities in the UK, all in the name of the Stonewall. And every time I thought about the whole saga, from a spit to the sweeping brooms to the viral explosion, I couldn't help but smile. Because sometimes karma doesn't just come knocking, it shows up, dressed in a bearskin hat, standing tall, and lets the whole world watch as it delivers justice. And man, it was satisfying. So what do you think? Did that tourist get the karma he deserved? Or should the punishment have been even harsher? Have you ever witnessed instant karma in real life? Drop your stories in the comments. I'd love to hear them. Let's see who's got the wildest tale of karma doing its thing.